This week I really wanted to start my patio makeover. And I really wanted a couple of those antique stone planters, but they're so expensive. I had a couple of these cheap plastic planters that I used from a previous makeover and decided I could probably make these. So that's what I did. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I am in the middle of a spring patio makeover. I haven't touched my patio since last fall when we did a makeover then. And we did a lot of fall tones, oranges and yellows and stuff. I really liked it back then. But now that we're past winter and the sun is out and it feels really nice to be outside again, I want to touch up this space, get it more spring and summer friendly, some lighter colors, just make it really warm and welcoming and inviting out there. So I'm in the middle of that, but I do have 3 big planters that I got for the fall makeover. They're plastic, they're kind of this wood tone. It worked for fall. It's not my aesthetic in general. I don't want to go out and just buy new planters, because if anybody has tried to purchase planters recently, they're expensive. So I kind of want to use the stuff I have right now, and because those aren't necessarily my aesthetic, I thought about just spray painting them like black or something and moving on. But I have a lot of black planters right now, and I really want to make something look a little bit more stone-like. That would be my preference. I love natural elements. So I figured I could DIY these. I figure I can try to turn these into what looks like in a more rustic, older, stone-looking planter. Obviously, the plastic is movable, so I'm gonna need something solid so that it doesn't crack. I'm also gonna need something that could interact with water because it's a planter and I'm gonna have to water the plants. There are a lot of considerations to be had, so I'm gonna run to the hardware store and grab a couple things, and we're gonna see which works, but we're gonna try to make these plastic wood-looking planters into something a little bit more high-end and rustic, especially because stone planters are so expensive, and I love them, but I'm not about to pay those prices for a planter. So let's DIY this. Let's do it. So I went ahead and cleaned up one of these smaller planters here. I think my plan of action, after some research, is that I'm going to use the mortar as like a foundation, basically. Do a couple coats, coat the entire thing with the mortar, because that's going to be a lot stronger. And then I think, because I like the texture that the joint compound will give me, I think I'm just going to use that for textural purposes on top of the mortar, but the mortar is going to be the thing that gives me the solid oomph, because the joint compound is water soluble. So if it gets touched by water, obviously it's a planter, I'm going to have to water my plants. It's not going to be good. So if I just use that for the texture and I seal it on top of the mortar, I think I'll be safe. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix up some mortar, and let's get started. For the first coat of mortar, there's no wrong way to do this. You're basically just trying to get rid of the texture of the plastic. You just want to get a nice, even, thin coat around the whole planter. also went ahead and did the top of the inside of the planter because obviously you'll be able to see that, and I think it'll just give an extra layer of strength to the mortar. Okay, so first coat is done, and it goes on pretty easy. Once you get the right consistency of the mortar, this is not a super hard project. They're looking good. You can already tell they're starting to dry because the mortar's starting to lighten up in a lot of areas. I obviously have to do a second coat on it because you can still see some of the ridges from the original design of the planters, which is fine. I was expecting to, so I'm gonna save the mortar. I have a ton of it still. I didn't even use a full bag. For real, if you want to use a smaller bag, I mean, the 50-pound bag cost me $6, so it's not like it's a ton of money, but if you could find a smaller bag, you are not going to need a 50-pound bag. I'm going to have so much mortar left over. So I'm going to let these dry, and then we will do another coat of that before we move on to the joint compound. It's been a couple hours, and as you can see, they are mainly pretty dry. There's still some spots here, but I want to go ahead and do my second coat and just get it on there. But then I'm going to let the second coat sit overnight before I do the joint compound. So let's get that second coat on real quick. The name of the game with all of these layers is texture. The more texture you add with each of the layers, the more realistic this stone is going to look. You want the stone to have a natural flow to it, so make sure you're not going in one direction when putting all of this mortar on. Honestly, just don't overthink it and have fun. I wanted these planters to look like a solid piece of stone, so I added more mortar around the edges just to thicken it up and make it look like it's a really dense, thick stone. Now that we're done with that second coat, I'm gonna let these planters sit and fully dry overnight. So we let these planters dry overnight, and they're actually looking really, really good. Honestly, I could go ahead and just paint these right now with this texture, and I think they'd look pretty authentic. I personally am going to try using the joint compound to give myself a little bit more of a natural texture. I just don't really like the stroke motions that the chisel or spatula thing that I was putting the mortar on with kind of has on it right now. So I want a more natural tone. But honestly, you could easily pass these off for stone right now. I'm gonna go ahead and use some joint compound and give myself a little bit more texture, and then I'm gonna go ahead and paint them because I want them to look old, antique-y, you know, those really popular planters that you see nowadays, planters and vases that are those like old world, look like they've been around forever. That's what I'm going for, and right now this looks more of like a natural stone, maybe concrete kind of vibe. Totally fine too if you filled these up with soil right now up to where you know, where the black doesn't show anymore. Honestly, I think you'd be able to pass it off. I don't think anybody would be able to tell unless they were looking closely. But I'm gonna go ahead and build up a little bit more texture with the joint compound just because that's what I'm looking for. So I'm gonna do that first, and then we'll start painting these. So this technique with the joint compound will require you to wear latex gloves, not just for your protection, but as a tool for the technique. You're gonna rub the joint compound in a really thin layer on top of the mortar, and then use the tackiness of the latex glove to lightly pat the joint compound, creating the texture. You really wanna spread out the joint compound as much as possible so you don't lose the definition from the mortar. Honestly, I already knew this project was gonna be super affordable, but I didn't quite realize how little of product I was gonna need. I bought the large bag, the 50-pound bag of mortar, and mixed half of the bag and used about a quarter of the mix that I did make. I bought 2 joint compounds, and I've used maybe a quarter of it, and that's on 3 planters. So you could easily, with just these 2 products, just one of these and 1 large bag, you could do probably at least 10 of these things. You don't need a lot. So this is a pretty affordable project. Not to mention the mortar and the joint compound are both like $5 or $6. So not a super expensive project to do, and I'm loving the way these are turning out. The joint compound is drying right now. I'm gonna let those sit and dry for a little bit before we start painting. Let's talk paint. Honestly, you could probably keep these like they are right now, and they could probably pass for stone because there is a lot of texture and a lot of differentiation between the color of the mortar and the color of the joint compound and stuff like that. I'm gonna go a step further. I'm gonna paint them. I'm gonna be using chalk paint. Chalk paint will just give it a little bit more texture. Texture is the name of the game here. The more texture, the more realism we're gonna get here. So I have a couple different colors of chalk paint. So we're just gonna play with building up color and using the texture to our advantage and see if we can get something more realistic. So I started with my lighter color, and I just got a little bit on the tip of the brush and just lightly started dabbing all over in no particular order. The key to your technique here is just to go light and not use brush strokes, but just dab. It's easier to build up the color slowly than try to undo a big mistake. I let that first color dry for a little bit before going in with my darker gray. I am so excited with how these are turning out. Honestly, they look so good, and this has been such an easy project. I normally, when projects are like big messes and they have a lot of new things, like I've never used mortar before, I've never mixed mortar, I've never used it on tile or anything really. So it kind of scared me a little bit, but this was so simple and I'm loving the way they're turning out so far. I'm gonna let them dry a little bit. I may touch up and do a little bit more paint because I think I want maybe a lighter finish and less of the dark tone. This was a really easy project. I'm so happy with how these are turning out. All right, I'm gonna let them sit a little bit. I might do a little touch up, then we're gonna seal them. Now that the paint is fully dry, we can complete the last step of these DIY planters. I'm just using a matte clear spray seal to protect it from any of the harsh elements since these planters will be on my patio. And once that seal is dry, it's finally time to fill these planters. I hope you guys enjoyed this DIY. I love the way these planters turned out. Make sure you stay tuned for the full spring patio makeover. I'm really loving the way this whole thing is shaping up, and I can't wait to start using it. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We have a ton of makeovers and projects coming up all over the apartment. I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.